Hey, martial arts fans, welcome to BJJCast. We are the podcast that brings you the latest news from the world of martial arts, from the dojo to the ring and beyond. From competition results to new training techniques, we've got you covered. We want to hear from you. If you have news to share, a story to tell, or a question, visit https://budocast.com to send us an email. Let's get into the news.
It's great to sit down and sort through this. I mean, this incredibly dense stack of sources we have today. The scope of what we're covering in this deep dive is genuinely staggering.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover. And if you're looking at the same source materials we are, you might initially wonder how it all connects, because on one side of the desk we have the very specific tactical mechanics of major UFC fight cards and the highly complex, almost mathematical rule sets of elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But then right next to those, we have an Associated Press report detailing the intense real-world self-defense realities happening right now in South Africa. And we also have United States Marine Corps training doctrine memos, plus data on the current martial arts boom in global pop culture.
On the surface, those look like entirely different worlds. But the overarching theme that binds every single one of these sources together is the intersection of elite physical performance and human resilience. We're examining what happens when the human body is pushed to its absolute physical limits, and more importantly, what happens within the human mind when failure is just not an option.
Exactly.
Whether it's adapting to an opponent in a regulated sport under bright stadium lights, or surviving the terrifying reality of a home invasion, or preparing for aquatic combat in the military, the underlying warrior spirit, that sheer refusal to quit, is the common thread we are going to trace for you today.
And we are going to start by looking at how that warrior spirit is being packaged and delivered to you, the consumer. Because the broadcast strategy behind UFC 326 represents a massive logistical and business shift. This was the first numbered UFC event to ever be simulcast on network television.
Which is huge.
Right. We had CBS airing the preliminary fights from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and then the broadcast moved exclusively behind a paywall on Paramount Plus for the main card.
It's the ultimate evolution of the freemium model applied to live violence.
Precisely. If you look at the mechanics of this funnel strategy, it's brilliant from a business perspective. You are using the reach of traditional network television to cast the widest possible net. You give the broader audience a taste of the technique, the drama, the striking mechanics.
Yeah.
But right when the stakes reach their absolute peak.
Right when the championship rounds are about to begin.
Exactly. All right. Then you pull that audience into the streaming platform. It completely upends the traditional isolated pay-per-view model we've seen for the last 2 decades.
Consider the ripple effect of that strategy, though. We are moving gladiatorial contests out of the niche premium cable shadows and directly into mainstream primetime cultural broadcasting. And based on the statements from the Morgan Stanley Technology, Media, and Telecom Conference, this CBS simulcast is just a stress test for something much larger. We are talking about the planned UFC White House card.
Setting up an octagon on the South Lawn is going to be a logistical masterpiece. Mark Shapiro, the CEO of TKO Group Holdings, noted that the exact broadcast plans are still strictly to be determined. But he explicitly went on record stating that CBS should be there.
And just to report the facts as presented by the organizers and the source material, the event is slated for a Sunday night, which breaks the UFC's traditional Saturday night model.
Yeah, that's a big shift.
It is. It's being planned to tie into the 250th America celebration. The current president is a well-known fan of the promotion, and TKO executives are positioning this not just as a fight card, but as a major national news event. Placing a steel cage on the grass of the White House is perhaps the most profound visual representation of how deeply martial arts has integrated into the American cultural fabric.
From a purely mechanical standpoint, I cannot stop thinking about the structural engineering required for that.
I'll bet.
You have to stabilize a multi-ton cage on perf.
Right.
You have to rig stadium-grade lighting without a ceiling infrastructure and manage the acoustics of an outdoor venue, all within the strictest security perimeter on the planet.
It was a massive undertaking.
It really is.
Yeah.
But let's bring the focus back to what actually happens inside that cage. Because UFC 326 was a masterclass in chaos, tactical adjustment, and the battle for the BMF title. The main event was Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira 2.
The historical context of this rematch is vital. When they first fought back in 2015, they were completely different athletes.
Oh, absolutely. If you track their biomechanical and tactical evolution since 2015, it's almost like watching 2 completely different species of fighter. Going into this bout, you had Holloway as the negative 220 favorite, and Oliveira as the plus 170 underdog. Holloway has evolved into this volume boxing savant. He controls the spatial mechanics of the octagon better than almost anyone.
Right.
He uses a constantly pumping jab and microscopic footwork adjustments to keep his opponents at the exact millimeter where he can hit them, but they cannot reach him. Oliveira, on the other hand, he transformed from a traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist into a terrifying Muay Thai Terminator. He waits forward with high guards, vicious knees, slicing elbows, and he knows that his opponents are absolutely terrified to take him down because he holds the record for the most submissions in UFC history.
And that evolutionary journey is exactly why they were fighting for the BMF title. This title is ceremonial. It doesn't sit in a specific weight class, but it represents an undeniable truth about both men. It's an award for career resilience. Both Holloway and Oliveira have suffered devastating knockout losses. They have both been written off by the media. They've both lost their undisputed championships.
Multiple times.
Yes. Yet they possess this incredible psychological elasticity. They continually rebuild their bodies, patch the holes in their games, and walk right back into the fire against the most dangerous men on earth.
But doesn't that ceremonial nature also serve as a brilliant marketing mechanism for the promotion? You take two guys who might not currently hold the undisputed divisional gold, and you create a tangible belt that allows them to headline a major card and monetizes their resilience.
It absolutely does. But the marketing only works because the fans recognize the authenticity of the grit. You cannot fake the kind of damage those two have endured and recovered from.
That grit and the sheer chaos of physical combat was fully on display during the undercard. We have to look at the Cody Garbrandt versus Zhao Long fight. Tactically, this was one of the most mechanically bizarre bouts we have seen in years. Zhao Long committed 3 separate, brutal groin strikes against Garbrandt. The second one was so severe that Garbrandt physically collapsed, coughing headfirst into a bucket between rounds.
It's a visceral reminder of the involuntary physiological responses of the human body. When you take blunt force trauma to that region, the vagus nerve is stimulated. It causes an immediate drop in blood pressure, severe nausea, and a complete loss of core stability. Your brain is telling you to fight, but your autonomic nervous system is forcing you into a fetal position.
Exactly. And if you are trying to execute high-level striking, your pelvic floor and your hips are your power source. Recovering from that kind of strike completely alters your ability to plant your feet. You cannot sit down on your punches. Your breathing becomes shallow, which instantly drains your cardiovascular endurance. Referee Herb Dean had to take 2 points from Zhao Long, 1 for the second infraction and 1 for the third.
That's just huge.
Unprecedented almost. For those unfamiliar with MMA scoring, taking 2 points is the equivalent of a football team being penalized half the length of the field twice in a row. It is an incredibly rare occurrence.
Yet Garbrandt still managed to win a 28-27 decision.
He survived through pure veteran instinct. Zhao actually secured a full mount sitting directly on Garbrandt's chest late in the fight and was throwing strikes after the final bell. It got so heated that Garbrandt shoved him, and security had to physically separate them. But Garbrandt's early work, his tactical wrestling adjustments to protect his compromised midsection, and those point deductions saved him. He had to completely rewrite his game plan on the fly while fighting off overwhelming nausea.
Which highlights a critical component of combat sports: emotional regulation. When your opponent is repeatedly breaking the rules and inflicting agonizing, illegal pain, the natural human reaction is blind rage. But blind rage destroys technique. You have to compartmentalize the anger to survive the round.
Yeah, you have to stay cold.
Exactly. But if we want to examine a different, perhaps more profound type of emotional depth, we need to look at Alberto Montes making his UFC debut against Ricky Turcios.
From a purely mechanical standpoint, Montes delivered a flawless finish. He secured an anaconda choke at 40 seconds into the second round. For the listeners trying to visualize this, the anaconda choke is a highly technical submission applied from the front headlock position. You wrap one arm around the opponent's neck and thread it under their armpit, locking your hands together. Then you execute what's called a gator roll, spinning your opponent onto their back.
It's a very tight submission.
Incredibly tight. The mechanics of the choke are fascinating. It compresses the carotid arteries against the opponent's own shoulder and your bicep, cutting off blood flow to the brain in seconds. Montes locked it up perfectly and put Turcios completely to sleep. It was his signature move executed on the biggest stage.
The physical execution was perfect, but what he did with the microphone afterward was far more impactful. Montez used his post-fight interview to deliver a raw, emotionally devastating speech about mental health and suicide awareness. He revealed he had recently lost someone very close to him to suicide. Standing there with the adrenaline of a violent victory still coursing through his veins, he pleaded with anyone listening who might be struggling to reach out for help.
It's a profound juxtaposition. You have a man who just violently rendered another human unconscious, using his moment of triumph to show complete emotional vulnerability.
It shatters the stoic gladiator myth. We tend to view these fighters as invincible action figures, immune to the daily tragedies of life. Montez reminded millions of viewers that the toughest people on the planet deal with the exact same profound grief, depression, and mental health struggles as anyone else. It reframes our definition of resilience. Surviving a fight against a trained killer is one thing. Surviving the dark corners of your own mind is an entirely different battle.
That is incredibly well said. Let's look at a few other notable results from the card because the physical and psychological toll was evident everywhere. Nyam Jargal Tumindembarel secured a grueling 30-27 unanimous decision over Cody Durden. In the first round, Tumindembarel locked in a brutal guillotine choke. Durden survived it, but the energy he expended fighting off the submission compromised him for the rest of the fight. Tumindembarel's top pressure was just too overwhelming. Unfortunately, this puts Durden on a precarious four-fight losing skid.
The psychological weight of a four-fight skid in a premier organization cannot be overstated. You are no longer just fighting your opponent. You are fighting for your livelihood, your contract, and your identity as an elite athlete. The fear of being cut from the roster can make a fighter overly cautious or recklessly desperate.
We also saw the heavy burden of expectation with Dante Johnson. He came into his fight against Cody Brundage as a massive 800 favorite.
Being an 8-1 favorite is its own kind of trap. The public and the odds makers aren't just expecting you to win, they are expecting a flawless, highlight reel execution. Any moment of adversity feels magnified.
And Johnson faced serious adversity. He ended up winning a split decision, but he struggled significantly. Mechanically, his footwork was plodding and heavy. When Brundage got him to the mat, Johnson struggled to create the necessary frames to get off his back. He relied entirely on his raw, explosive power and late takedown defense to sway two of the three judges. It was a sloppy performance that highlighted the gap between athletic potential and tactical refinement.
This brings us to a critique leveled by veteran Michael Johnson, who also fought on the card. Before the event, he made some very sharp comments regarding the younger generation of fighters. He stated that many of them lack the actual fight aspect required to succeed at the highest level. His argument was that the younger demographic is focusing entirely too much on TikTok, building social media brands, and posting highly edited, aesthetically pleasing sparring videos.
He essentially accused them of prioritizing content creation over combat readiness.
Exactly. It raises a fascinating question about modern athletic psychology. Are you training to optimize an algorithm, or are you conditioning your mind and body to endure agonizing physical suffering? Social media rewards flashy techniques that look good in a 10-second clip. But as we just discussed with Garbrandt and Durden, actual combat requires grinding through nausea, exhaustion, and panic. Michael Johnson's critique highlights the stark difference between the aesthetics of martial arts and the brutal, unglamorous reality of a locked cage.
That concept, the brutal reality versus the regulated aesthetics, is the perfect bridge to our next set of sources. We need to dive into the absolute chess match that is elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now. If you love the mechanics of how sports operate behind the scenes, the 2026 BJJ calendar and the economics of the ranking system are a fascinating study in logistical pressure.
It's a massive grind.
Let's break down the IBJJF Grand Slam structure. You have four major pillars: the European Championship in Lisbon in January, the Pan American Championship in the U.S. in March, the Brasileiros in Brazil in April or May, and the World Championship in Long Beach.
The structure itself is a crucible. But the true genius and the true cruelty of the IBJJF system is what they call the points economy. To even step onto the mats at the World Championships as a black belt, an athlete must accumulate roughly 50 points over a rolling 12 to 36-month window.
But it's not a simple accumulation. They use a point decay system, right?
Yes. After 12 months, the points you bled for lose half their value. This is a brilliant, albeit punishing psychological mechanism. It completely eliminates the ability for an athlete to strategically go dormant. You cannot win a major tournament and then rest on your laurels for a year and a half. The point decay forces these elite grapplers into a state of perpetual chronic activity. They must continually subject their bodies to the stress of international travel, brutal weight cuts, and high-level performance just to maintain their eligibility.
But if we look at the physiological toll of that, it forces these athletes to completely rewrite the science of periodization. Olympic athletes peak once every 4 years. Normal combat sports athletes peak maybe twice a year. The IBJJF system demands that you peak 4 or 5 times a year just to outrun the point decay. It is a recipe for catastrophic physical burnout. You have athletes stepping onto the mats in Lisbon with torn meniscus cartilage or blown out shoulders because they literally cannot afford to lose the points.
It demands a lifestyle of unrelenting resilience. But as you pointed out, it comes at a massive physical cost.
And we have to contrast this IBJJF ecosystem with the parallel circuits that are drawing athletes away. You have the AJP World Tour, hosting massive events in places like Abu Dhabi and Rio. Fighters are migrating to the AJP Tour for a very simple, mechanical reason: financial incentives. Prestige doesn't pay for MRIs or physical therapy. Then you have the ADCC Brazil Open, which is entirely no-G and relies on selective invites and open qualifiers, bypassing the cumulative ranking model entirely.
It creates a profound strategic dilemma for the athlete. Do I risk further injury and exhaustion for a significant paycheck at an AJP event, or do I protect my body to ensure I can secure the required points in Lisbon to cement my legacy at the IBJJF Worlds? It is a constant balancing act between financial survival and historical prestige.
So how does this punishing schedule manifest in the actual mechanics on the mat? If we look at the current rankings, Eric Muniz dos Santos is leading the pack with an incredible 1,224 points, followed by Francisco Papastero at 838.5. To accumulate those numbers, you have to be stepping onto the podium with machine-like consistency.
It's unbelievable pace.
And if we analyze the technical meta, the overarching tactical strategy dominating the sport in 2026, we are seeing a massive shift toward heavy pressure passing. For years, the sport was dominated by complex lapel entanglements. If you aren't familiar with this, players would literally use the skirts of their own or their opponent's jackets to wrap up their legs and arms, tying them into a complex spider web that slowed the match to a crawl.
Very slow, very methodical.
Right. But right now, the meta has evolved to destroy that. Grapplers are using body locks and headquarters positional variations. Headquarters is a position where the top player stands over a seated opponent, pinning one of the opponent's legs between their own, and dropping their hips to make the bottom player carry their entire body weight. You are systematically squashing the modern inverted guard player with relentless mechanical gravitational pressure. It exhausts the bottom player's core until they give up the guard pass.
It is a grueling, unglamorous style of fighting. But inside that shifting technical landscape, we are witnessing beautiful examples of veteran adaptation. Take João Miao, who is now competing in the Master 1 division. He is adapting his legendary De La Riva guard.
For those who haven't rolled on the mats, the De La Riva guard involves being on your back, wrapping your outside leg around your standing opponent's lead leg, and hooking your foot deeply inside their thigh. It is designed to off-balance them.
Exactly. And Miao is using decades of technical refinement in that position to overcome the raw athletic and explosive advantages of the younger opponents he faces. He's using microscopic adjustments in leverage to defeat pure speed. On the other side, you have Tainan Dalpra, whose pressure passing is so calibrated and methodical, it looks like a hydraulic press operating on the mat. And at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, look at Jalen Fanasier at roosterweight, the absolute lightest division. Typically, the lighter weight classes rely heavily on conservative point management and sweeping strategies. But Fanasier is displaying intense, submission-only aggression, completely ignoring the conservative meta. It's a fascinating display of individual psychology expressing itself through physical mechanics.
It truly is the ultimate physical chess match, played at the limits of human endurance. Before we dive deeper, we want to thank our sponsors who keep this show running. First, Elite Sports, the leaders in premium quality fightwear for BJJ and MMA. Whether you're rolling or striking, they've got the gear to keep you moving. Visit them at elitesports.com. And if you're a school owner looking to optimize your dojo's performance, you need to check out Lotus by Open Black Belt. It's the ultimate management software for tracking ranks, attendance, and billing. They are currently offering a free trial to our listeners. Streamline your business so you can spend more time on the mats. Visit openblackbelt.com to start your trial today. You can find links for both in the show notes.
We have spent the first half of this deep dive discussing martial arts within highly regulated environments. We've talked about point decay, referees, and the aesthetics of a broadcast. But we need to shift our focus to a profoundly grave reality. What happens when the mechanics of combat aren't used for a medal or a paycheck, but for the fundamental right to survive.
This is where the context really shifts.
The Associated Press recently released a detailed, harrowing report on the situation in South Africa. We must look at these statistics impartially to understand the sheer scope of the crisis. The South African government has officially declared gender-based violence a national disaster. The femicide rates in the country are 5 to 6 times higher than the global average. More than 35% of women over the ages 18 have experienced physical or sexual violence. Compounding this daily threat is a catastrophic systemic failure. The conviction rate for reported rapes in 2021 was only around 8%.
When you hear an 8% conviction rate, it means the deterrent of law enforcement has effectively vanished. So what does this mean on a practical, tactical level for the women living in this environment? It means they are forced to take their survival entirely into their own hands through rigorous, specialized physical training.
Which is an incredible burden.
If we look at the Out There sport shooting range in Bronkhorstspruit, lead instructor Claire van der Westhuizen is running courses specifically designed for women. And she isn't teaching standard static target practice. She is teaching the biomechanics of crisis management. She trains women to deploy and fire a 9mm pistol while lying flat on their stomachs or defending themselves from their backs.
It's a completely different skill set.
Totally different. The mechanics of this are incredibly difficult. When you are on your back, you don't have a stance to absorb the recoil. You have to worry about spalling the fragmentation of bullets hitting the ground near you. You have to maintain weapon retention while an attacker is potentially on top of you. It requires a complete rewiring of your spatial awareness under extreme adrenaline.
It is about reclaiming agency in a society that has left them profoundly vulnerable. And we see this same pursuit of agency at Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Johannesburg, where instructor Stephanie Graham is teaching women the brutal realities of hand-to-hand self-defense.
Graham's curriculum focuses heavily on breaking chokeholds and escaping wall traps. Tactically, if a heavier, stronger attacker pins you against a wall, trying to push them away with muscle is a guaranteed failure. Graham teaches the mechanics of skeletal framing. You have to place your forearms against the attacker's collarbones, drop your center of gravity to lower your hips, and use the wall to pivot and slide out of the trap. It relies entirely on leverage and joint manipulation rather than raw strength.
The physical techniques are essential, but the psychological impact detailed in the AP report is deeply moving. The report shared stories of remarkable resilience born from trauma. Sunette Dutoit, a 51-year-old grandmother, began firearm training after surviving a horrific home invasion where she was tied up by 5 men. She explicitly stated she had to undergo this training just to regain the confidence to move around her own house without feeling paralyzed by vulnerability.
That is just the level of trauma there is staggering.
It really is.
Yeah.
You have Marguerite Hershenson, 49, taking these intense classes alongside her 21-year-old daughter, Nika. They stated plainly that they can no longer rely on the police to protect them. Tatiana Laika, 33, took up jiu-jitsu specifically because the rapidly rising numbers of gender-based violence convinced her that learning how to physically escape an attacker was her #1 priority in life. Perhaps the most striking and tragic detail from the report is that gym managers noted many women hide this self-defense training from their husbands and partners.
Think about the complexity of that dynamic. They are learning the mechanics of leverage and situational awareness to protect themselves from the outside world, but they feel so unsafe within their own homes that the training itself has to be a secret. It highlights how pervasive the threat is.
And while it is incredibly inspiring to see these women learning the mechanics of survival, we have to examine the perspective of the activists on the ground. Impiwa Manguvert-Sanka from the organization Sonk Gender Justice offers a crucial critique. She argues that while individual empowerment is positive, the burden of safety is being unfairly placed squarely onto the shoulders of women and girls.
That is a very sharp point. The state is failing to prosecute perpetrators, allowing a 92% failure rate for rape convictions, and the downstream effect is that the victims are forced to spend their own money, time, and emotional energy learning how to fight for their lives.
It is a glaring example of institutional failure forcing grassroots resilience. The individual is compelled to become a warrior because the societal contract is broken down. It is a sobering reality of what martial arts looks like when stripped of its sporting context. It is purely, tragically, about survival.
That concept of institutional failure forcing individual readiness leads us perfectly into how a massive functioning government entity formalizes the exact mechanics of combat and survival. Let's pivot to the United States Marine Corps Martial Arts and Fitness Center of Excellence, or MAFCE,
Right into the military doctrine.
Yes, I've been analyzing Maradmin 08326, which outlines the calendar year 2026 schedule for their training programs, and the logistical doctrine is fascinating. For 2026, they are scheduling the Marine Corps Martial Arts Program, or MCM-APE. They are holding 2 resident martial arts instructor trainer courses, the MAITCs, and 1 standard instructor course at Raider Hall. They are also sending mobile training teams on road shows to major hubs like Paris Island and Okinawa. But here's the critical tactical detail. They strictly cap these courses at 55 students.
Why such a specific, relatively small number for an organization as massive as the Marine Corps?
It is purely about quality control and the pedagogy of violence. You cannot mass-produce elite hand-to-hand combat instructors in an auditorium. If you are teaching a Marine the exact biomechanics of a hip throw or the precise leverage required for weapon retention when someone grabs the barrel of their rifle, the instructor needs to see every single repetition. A slightly wrong hip angle in a grappling exchange can mean the difference between neutralizing a threat and being disarmed. You need small student-to-instructor ratios to ensure the psychological conditioning and physical techniques are perfectly installed before those Marines return to their units to teach others.
It reflects a very modern understanding of physical readiness within a military force. It is no longer just about running endless miles in boots and doing pull-ups until muscle failure. The MAFCE also oversees the Force Fitness Program, or FFP. Marines who pass the Force Fitness Instructor course earn an entirely new military occupational specialty, the 0919 MOS.
That's a dedicated career path for fitness.
Exactly. This represents a massive ideological shift. The course utilizes structured, functional exercise science. They focus on a holistic approach to optimize both mental and physical performance. They are applying the exact same rigorous scientific periodization that elite Olympic athletes use, but they are applying it to the context of carrying 80 pounds of gear in combat zones. The goal is to maximize a unit's overall physical resilience while drastically reducing the musculoskeletal injury rates that plague infantry units.
And if you want to look at the extreme end of where that physical resilience is tested, we have to look at the aquatic environments. The MAFCE also runs the Marine Corps Water Survival Training Program. According to the Maradmin, they are running 6 Water Survival Advanced, or WSA, courses at Raymer Hall in 2026. This is far beyond basic swimming. Tactically, water completely changes the physics of human survival. When you hit the water in full combat gear, your mobility is instantly gone. The drag coefficient of a plate carrier makes standard swimming strokes nearly impossible. Your boots act like anchors.
The environment is actively fighting you.
Right. The WSA trains Marines to act as safety swimmers capable of rescuing fully loaded troops in aquatic emergencies. It requires an elite understanding of aquatic physics, but more importantly, it requires total, absolute panic control.
Panic control in the water is one of the hardest psychological traits to master. When water enters your airway, the mammalian diving reflex and acute stress response trigger instant panic. Rational thought shuts down.
Exactly. The training forces the brain to override the primal drowning reflex. You have to learn how to manage your breath, unbuckle heavy gear while submerged, and physically control another human being who is actively thrashing and trying to pull you under out of their own panic.
And that is the essence of structured, institutionalized resilience. The Marine Corps is systematically building a physiological and psychological framework. They ensure that when a human being is placed in the most chaotic, physically demanding, and terrifying environments on Earth, whether that is close quarters combat in a doorway or a deep water emergency during an amphibious operation, their training overrides their fear. They are mass-producing resilience through highly regulated doctrine.
That institutionalized survival instinct we see in the Marines, or the desperate need for agency we see in Johannesburg, those aren't just real-world tactical necessities. They are primal human drives. And it's exactly why those specific drives dominate our global cultural zeitgeist. We can see these themes of combat, mechanics, and resilience reflecting clearly in our entertainment right now. Look at the massive global success of the martial arts anime Bakidu, The Invincible Samurai on Netflix. The streaming data is wild. Netflix dropped all 13 episodes of the first season in February 2026. Within just 4 days, it racked up 3.4 million views, instantly ranking number 2 globally for all non-English shows.
When a show about hand-to-hand combat resonates that deeply across different cultures, we have to examine the central theme. The plot of Bakidu follows the protagonist, Baki Hanma. He has already achieved his ultimate goal. He's universally recognized as the world's strongest boy.
He's reached the absolute peak.
Right. But the narrative asks a fascinating psychological question. What happens when the apex predator has no prey? What happens when the warrior has no war? Baki falls into a state of profound boredom and existential apathy. He is dissatisfied with the opponents in the underground fighting arena because they offer no real threat to his life. He's desperately seeking a true test of his limits.
And the show delivers that challenge in a highly stylized sci-fi form, a genetically cloned version of the legendary historical samurai, Miyamoto Musashi. It's a brilliant narrative device. You are pitting modern, scientifically optimized fighting techniques against the legendary mythical resilience of an ancient warrior who fought to the death.
Baki's excitement at finally facing an overwhelming, potentially lethal challenge speaks to that innate human desire to test our own boundaries. It is the externalization of the internal struggles we have discussed throughout this entire deep dive. We are drawn to stories where the mechanics of combat break down and the characters are forced to rely purely on their will to survive.
You see that exact same mythological resilience dominating another piece of media right now, Kill Bill. The whole bloody affair is currently sitting at the absolute #1 spot for free movies in America on the Fossum streaming platform.
A classic.
A total classic. This is Quentin Tarantino's maximalist 2003 revenge epic, starring Uma Thurman as the bride. If you look at the mechanics of that film, it is highly stylized and absurdly bloody. You have the iconic, chaotic fight against the Crazy 88s, the specific reverence for the Hattori Hanzo swords, and the exaggerated wire-fu mechanics.
But underneath the cinematic style, Kill Bill is a story of ultimate physiological and psychological rebuilding. The bride survives a massacre, wakes up from a years-long coma, and has to physically will her atrophied limbs to move again, starting with just wiggling her big toe. She embarks on a globe-trotting mission of vengeance, absorbing immense punishment along the way. The fact that audiences in 2026 are still flocking to a movie from 2003 proves that the theme is timeless. Watching a human being survive unimaginable trauma, systematically rebuild their body, and conquer their environment is a perfect reflection of the warrior spirit. It is the cinematic equivalent of the BMF title, the Marine Corps training doctrine, and the women learning self-defense in South Africa.
It perfectly ties every single thread of today's deep dive together.
As we wrap up this journey, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to consider. We have traveled today through drastically different worlds. We've analyzed the highly regulated, mathematically grueling point systems of elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We've examined the massive multi-million-dollar broadcasting spectacle and funnel strategies of the UFC. We've looked at the rigorous, science-backed biomechanical doctrine of military training, and we've faced the harrowing, unvarnished reality of women fighting for the very survival in South Africa. Through all of this, it becomes undeniably clear that martial arts is not simply a sport or a hobby. It is a fundamental expression of the human condition. I want to ask you, how much of human history has been shaped not just by our capacity for violence, but by the disciplined, resilient training required to survive it? The specific techniques change. The arenas evolve from battlefields to octagons. But the human necessity to endure remains constant. I encourage you to think about how you apply your own discipline, your own mental resilience, and your own tactical adjustments in the daily battles of your life.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us to talk about the latest in martial arts. We'll be back soon with more news, stories, and insights. Until then, remember to train hard and stay humble. If you have any news to share, reach out to us at brutocast.com and follow us on our social media platforms.